Welcome back to another Relatively Damaged Live. I'm Angela. And Kat's next to me.
And I'm Kat.
We're
having some technical difficulties today, so
we are. What if this is not a perfect stream to have slurs on?
Yeah, well, we will get started, I guess, with the quote.
Right? Yes, we can do that. Which is slurs don't. Oh, you know what? We're having a big delay, probably about a second or two.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. That's okay. Do you want to do the quote or do you want me to?
I can do it.
Okay.
All right. So the quote from Josh Deaver and Herman Kaplan from Bad Language. Slurs don't just divide the world up into categories. They are a part of a project of dividing up the world that starts with bigoted and offensive assumptions built in.
Isn't that the truth? I think it's the assumption. Really?
Right. The offensive assumption, I hope we're better now, about somebody's value or worth, or mostly value or worth, and it's being in a offensive or derogatory in those ways. Otherwise, they wouldn't be slurs.
Well, and words that maybe once were not slurs became slurs, and then may not be slurs again, right? So.
And I also think it depends on the context. A lot of times is that groups have come back and they have claimed that slur as their own and made it a word of pride or a term of pride.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know with disability, with the word disabled, that is true. Or if you look at the word crip, or for a cripple, the recent movie on Netflix, Crip Camp, is about kind of almost like owning the slur instead of the slur owning them or us, because I have a disability.
Right. Being a lesbian, dyke. Mm-hmm. It's a big one. And to claim that, it's like, yeah, so it's almost as if we claim it ourselves, that it dilutes the power of bad actors.
Right. And I think the more we claim it or the more we hear it within a safe environment, the less damage it has outside of that environment. So,
right.
Like you might use it within the groups that you're with and then walk down the street and somebody says it. And maybe at that point it's like, and who cares? I mean, I don't, there's an assumption that comes with the slur, almost some presumption, right? If someone uses it, the presumption, depending on the situation, I might make a presumption that it's bad, or I might make a presumption that it's good. Again, getting into the binary of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also, though, when thinking about it, and I know there's another quote that we have for later that speaks a little bit to this. If I have a conversation with you, and let's say you're aiming toward what the definition of dyke is, right? Let's say mm-hmm. that, and instead of using that word, you use something to describe that word. All of a sudden, there's less power in the word, right? Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Can you explain a little bit more?
So I think, for instance, if someone's trying to use it in a derogatory manner, right? Let's say they're trying to use it in a derogatory manner, but they don't use the word. Instead, they say, you women who love women are just really whatever they intend by using the word dyke. Well, at that point, it's like, okay, that's your opinion.
Whatever.
Right. But the actual word stings.
Yeah. So like it's okay for me to call myself a dyke if I wanted to do that.
Right.
But if you were to do that, or worse yet, some man were to do that, that would be very offensive.
Yeah.
Because you don't identify that way. I mean, I think a lot, let's say it without saying it, probably the biggest, slur is the N-word.
Right.
We can't say the N-word, but if you listen to music or you hear people say it, African American people say it, I've heard, not everyone, but I heard in certain groups that it's more acceptable.
Well, and as a white person, if I've been accepted into that group, then in some cases I can use it, right? Because it's part of the language of that group, and I may have earned the right to use that language. But I wouldn't have been able to use it right out the gate because I would have to earn that privilege.
Right. And even then it would almost have to be explicitly stated that you have that privilege.
Right. So, or it would definitely have to be tested at some point, right?
Somehow.
Yeah, whether someone tells me or I just try it.
You said about the show Crip Camp.
Yes, the movie. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And like I could never imagine saying that.
The word cripple or the word crip?
Either or.
Okay.
Either or. And I think that's just because the way language has evolved. And that implies that if I were to use that whoever I was using that with, that you're less than.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if it was just a joking thing, and the same thing about the word dyke. If you were to come over to my house and we'd have a meal and you're a couple of dykes. Now I'd probably give you a pass because you and I have a great relationship. We're great friends. But at the beginning of our friendship, maybe not. I probably would have been offended by that. Right.
I wonder, I'm just even thinking about, for me, the word disabled has, to me, when I break down the word, means non-operable. But when other people use it, I don't know that they're coming from that same meaning. I think overall in society, there is an implicit bias. So that would be a bias that we're totally unaware of when it comes to that word. And that's just because, did you disable the alarm? The car's disabled on the side of the road. It's no longer working. It's causing problems. There's this whole, for me, this idea. So it's really hard for me to accept that word. And then what I've been working on doing is, instead of assuming that person interprets that word the same way I do, is I'm starting to check, what do you mean by disabled? Right? Because for me, if saying disability is one thing, because that just means parts of me don't work the way I think that they should, or that I was used to for most of my life. And so I think that aims to staying curious about what other people are trying to say. I am reading the book Bad Language, which is where the quotes from today are from, and just really diving into the idea that communication is way, way, way more intricate than we even realize. I may say one thing. Well, by the time I've said it and you've interpreted it, it's changed. I spoke to a gal who wrote Narcissist, the author of Narcissist, not Narcissist, Narcissus, who also studied translation theory. And one of the things she explained to me in that when we were speaking was that so the person who wrote a book in another language wrote it from their perspective and wrote it to mean something in particular. But when you get into translation, now the original author and the translator have that new translator has to determine what the best word is to use in that given text. So then it becomes a work of its own. It becomes a totally new piece of work, and artistic in the fact that the translator now has chosen to, or made decisions about which words that the author may have intended.
Right. Well, yeah, that just reminds me of all the controversy over the Bible.
Okay.
And how that was translated and what it was translated from and the different meanings and all of that kind of stuff. And so I understand where you're going with that, how the translation changes the meaning in a sense, because oftentimes words are in a context that are cultural context, linguistic context, and so that doesn't necessarily translate. You know, simple objects might translate phone, computer. But when you're talking about deeper meanings of things,
right?
Well, you're talking about ideas.
Yeah. And you and I may agree on something. So we could have a conversation that says, we're going to go live at 9:15 on Monday, right? Which, again, to our viewers, we apologize for being late with our technical difficulties. Thank you for showing up. We appreciate you. So then let's say you ask me a question or I ask you a question, and maybe the response is, well, I'll be ready at 9. You and I both understand what that means in relation to the getting online. It's not, well, I'm going to be online and in the studio at 9 a.m. so that we can have a conversation and make sure we can get into the studio, right? But we take these shortcuts in our communication. And I think that's, which creates problems with slurs, right? It also creates problems other places, because do we really know what the slur means?
Right. And we know what we mean by the slur.
Between us, we might.
Well, no, we as individuals.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm saying is, if I was to say, oh yeah, I was at the Home Depot and I saw the dykes there, stereotypical kind of thing that lesbians like to hang out at Home Depot. But I'm saying that, and in the context of what I'm saying, what I know is, I mean, like, yes, I recognize, a female couple that's together in Home Depot, and I'm right. saying that, and I'm saying that in kind of a joking way. No offense is meant by it. But let's say some guy comes in and he's trying to do something, and he's saying, the effing dykes, doing this. He's meaning it in a different way, and he knows he's meaning it in a different way. But sometimes it, if I were to, you and I have talked about disability enough, and you also know that if I said something that you would find, offensive, you would understand that I don't mean it to be offensive.
Or if I was concerned, or for whatever reason that day, I would check it. I would investigate, what do you mean by that today?
Right. And so
maybe I'm having a bad day and I think it is bad that day.
Right. So if I were to make that, I know you prefer, and correct me if I'm wrong, the term a person with a disability.
Correct.
Okay. So if I were to say, you know, and just talking, and I say, yeah, my friend Angela's disabled, you'd be like, wait, check. I think you would know I didn't mean anything offensive by that.
Right. It's so funny though, that feeling still comes up. Even though we're just talking about the possibility, like, how dare she call me disabled?
Right. Well, and that's the whole thing, I think, about reclaiming the language. I think really when we reclaim that language as a person in that it's being used to denigrate, right. I think we're giving it power for us, but it still makes it wrong for someone else to say it.
Mm-hmm.
I also think of like when people are using pronouns.
Right.
And if I were to tell you my pronouns are they and their, and you insist on calling me she, I could get offended by that.
Right. Even though I had no intention, but that feeling comes up, and then you're offended.
But you would recognize that I have female anatomy, and so you would assume the binary. She's a she, because we're accustomed to that. The same thing about changing language. You know, like you said, and I know you and I have talked about this before. You said some people will claim the word disabled.
It actually, for mental health, it's actually really important to take pride in having a disability, or there's something intrinsically that happens that makes it easier to cope with a disability. And maybe that's something that the LGBTQ community figured out when Pride, Pride started for the month of June. And I think that maybe on some level that was recognized, which is why, people with disabilities have July as Pride Month. And I'm not sure which one started first, so I can't speak to that. But I do know there are significant improvements in mental health when people claim their struggle.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's it. So like with LGBTQ people, there's the struggle. And so saying, yes, I'm out, I'm proud, it's saying I'm okay. And it's an affirmation that, yes, I am different than the norm, but I am okay, I am valid, I am worthy, and claiming that.
Right.
And
all of those words can still be used, like LGBTQI, all of those can still, in some sense, depending on the person using them, be used as slurs.
Right. And then, those words in and of itself usually aren't a slur, but it's the derivations of the word.
Right. But it's almost like when owning it takes the power out of the person who's trying to use it in a negative or in a hurtful way. Not a negative, but a hurtful way.
Yeah. So, I mean, in reality, if you were to say to me, yeah, you're an old dyke. Like, yeah, so what? But I know you. And even if that guy in the homophobic guy in the Home Depot would say it, I'd be like, yeah, so what? But I'd also be like, you jerk.
You're a jerk. There's a judgment that came from it, not even investigating. I've been really trying to be aware of where I don't investigate, and make that assumption when someone says something that I take negative, as hurtful. Like for me, you may laugh at this, but I have a hard time with the F word. I really do. If somebody's using it, I start feeling anxious. I think they're angry, but they're not always angry. And if I check it, and then it comes down to, and if I check it, usually they'll tell me that, right? Because I didn't finish that sentence. But sometimes there are people who just use it like it's part of their language. I know there's a guy I've seen on a reel or something, and he uses really bad language. And and he does, I think he coaches parents and kids or something like that. And he cusses a lot. And I'm just like, ugh. So I don't know. Even I've had friends that it was like the F word every other word. And I'll never forget one conversation I had where it took me that much longer to interpret what they were saying because of how they used the word. So every other word may have been the F word, but they weren't mad. They weren't angry at me. They were just trying to explain something. And then I would be quiet for a minute because I literally had to, number one, get through the emotions because of my feelings around the word. And then I had to interpret what they were saying. So it took me longer to process.
Yeah. Well, and you know, it's again, that's kind of funny. It's almost like, yeah, you have this reaction, and then you know, you and I've talked, and I've dropped the F-bomb a couple times, but I don't think usually when I've done it because of something very visceral inside of me.
Yeah, and then I'm right there with you. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah. Hey, you turned me on to Lily Allen's song, so.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm very angry when I use that word.
Yeah. Well, and what's really funny is I have a cousin who every other word of his out of his mouth is the F word. Mm-hmm. And my mom refuses to talk to him. And then, but then, you know, so my mom's very much, you know, against it. And then I heard when she's angry and she drops it, and I'm just like, oh my God. You know, I feel like my mom is saying the F word.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, it really also, how I interpret it also depends on who's saying it. If my mom were to ever drop the F word, I don't think I've ever heard her say it. I think I would be really confused or scared. And I'm in my late 40s.
Well, that's what I was like, when my mom said it, I was just like, you know, because I never heard her say that growing up, and you know, never. But getting over that shock and doing that, yeah. And I think that's the same thing if we're using in context. If you have a person who is normally, you know, sensitive to their language or thoughtful in their language, maybe be a better way of saying it, and then they drop a slur.
Yeah, then it means something different.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, and it could be, you know, a number of reasons why it is. And are you familiar with Avenue Q?
No.
It's a musical, and it's done with puppets and people. And anyways, they're talking about certain things. I'm going to see it hopefully this weekend. But anyway, I've seen parts of it. They have a song in there called "Everyone's a Little Bit Racist."
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it does kind of show that. And you could also say everyone's a little bit homophobic or heterophobic or, you know, whatever.
Yeah, everybody
categorizes the other.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a normal human thing too, right? Let me put you in a category that makes sense. But also what happens is it locks that person into that role. And once they're in that role, if they change, then I get mad or frustrated because now their role, them changing, see if I can finish my sentence, them changing impacts me, and then I've got to make new choices. So when they do that, that's confusing.
Yeah. So a new slur that's been out is called a groomer. It's been used against LGBTQ people for the longest time.
Oh, I think it's been used for sex traffickers too.
Well, sex traffickers are groomers.
I know.
For that, and that's the implication in that.
Right.
Is that LGBTQ people are doing it. Now here's
so hold on, let me clarify. So by using, okay, I see your point, I think. By using the word, even though it's not true, because it is rightfully used to describe a sex trafficker, right? That by shifting and using that to describe someone in the LGBTQIA plus group is really it's not true, or it might be true for a very small amount of people, just like there are not a tremendous amount of sex traffickers in this world. But for the entire group, that would be an inappropriate globalization of that term.
And also let's clarify something. The overwhelming majority of pedophiles are heterosexual males.
Correct.
So let's just make that clear. But there's always that that fear, and so so people say this. So like with drag queen story hours, oh, you're grooming our children. Not even necessarily sexually, but I'm saying that this is a word that's used.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it's again, it's taken out of context to denigrate something you don't understand.
Well, as a parent, am I grooming my children to be the way that I think they should be? Every parent does, really, if we think about it, because the way we do life and interpret life, it depends on what we think is right for our children and how they need to behave, or the societal groups we go in. So I would have to be really careful about how I chose to use that word, because depending on the definition or the context in which it's used, it can be hurtful or helpful.
Well, right. You stay curious. So here's an extreme example I just read in the news the other day. So a teacher in a junior high had feminine hygiene products because sometimes the girls would come and it would happen and they didn't have them with them.
Mm-hmm.
So she would give them to her students. We're not talking birth control. We're talking feminine hygiene habits. And of course, it was a male saying that this woman was grooming. And it was all this big brouhaha over this, which shows the ignorance of many men about the female anatomy, first of all.
Yeah.
And the age when menses can start for young women. But, it's just like, so you're taking these terms and you're putting them into some kind of context. And it's just like, so not even taking the time to be curious about what is actually happening.
Right. Yeah.
And
turning something into more than it is.
Right. Turning it into a slur.
Yeah, it's damaging, right? Because those students may have felt safe. Especially junior high ages, when many girls start having menses. There's nothing worse than having to excuse yourself, go to the nurse's office, tell someone else instead of, oh, shoot, I need help. And most of the time, I think that happens. Well, there are probably a few reasons, but it's really important for parents to have those conversations with their girls and prepare them. Let me give this to you in case, because you're around the age that this might start.
Right. But imagine, you and I would think that, and I hazard to guess you did that with your girls.
Mm-hmm.
Not every parent does that.
Right.
And so sometimes it might fall to a compassionate teacher who realizes, kids that age are mean.
Yes.
The embarrassment for the girl, the discomfort, all of that kind of stuff. And then to know that somebody's compassionate like that, to take a word that's used as a slur to mean someone who is sexually exploiting, and to use that slur for that person, it's horrible.
Yeah. I do want to read this last quote. I know we're out of time. And it's also, again, by Josh Deaver and Herman Kaplan, Out of Bad Language. It says, as with metaphors, there seems to be something ineffable about the content of slurs. Any attempt to state clearly what the metaphor or the slur says leaves one feeling that the heart of the thing has been left out. One aspect of the ineffability of slurs is that the descriptive paraphrases seem to leave out the full nastiness of the slur. No matter what the descriptive content proposed, that content said without the slur lacks the same emotional impact. So I think too, I think for me, I'm going to make it a goal if I do hear something or I do question, or something that hurts, I think I'm going to make it a goal of mine, to keep checking and to check probably now more often than I was before for the actual meaning behind what someone means when they're using a slur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. What a great quote to end with.
Yeah, I thought so too. And hopefully we've, given you some interesting things to think about or generated some interesting thoughts by having you watch the show. There is also a Relatively Damaged podcast where I interview amazing guests who have overcome some sort of struggle in their lives and how they found hope in healing. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple, and many more. I'm Angela.
And I'm Kat. Have a great day.
We'll see you next week.